is the status of women in politics?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, you could come at this from a variety of perspectives. So I'm going to go with the classic kind of CAWP approach, which is one of the things we're known for at the Center for American Women in Politics is keeping these data, keeping the numbers of where women stand across levels of office, by state, by party, and in terms of their representation among office holders. And certainly we'll talk about that as well in terms of keeping the data on women as candidates and dig into that probably about 22. But as you already mentioned, if we look at the status by numbers, women are over 50% of the population, but less than a third of elected officials across levels of office. So women are 27.5% of Congress, about 28% in the House, 24% in the Senate, 31% of statewide elective executive offices. So these are, as you all know, governors, attorneys general, superintendents of public instruction, all of those offices that are elected statewide. Just 9 of 50 governors. That's actually a record, sadly. So that's the height of where we are. 31% of state legislators, as Shagah mentioned. And then even when we get down to the mayoral level, we keep this data for cities over 30,000. So obviously it's still not comprehensive, but if we look at that level, women are about 26%. So we see real consistency in women's representation. Unfortunately, that consistency is far below what we would discuss as gender parity. We also, though, when we're thinking about the status, want to break that down. Again, not overall necessarily, but also look by party, by race, ethnicity, by office. And so I'm just going to give a couple of those facts so as not to bore everybody, but all of this is, available on our website. We have a database as well as some summary sheets that are hopefully easily navigated by anybody who's interested. But at every level of office, Democrats outnumber Republicans among women office holders. We're certainly talking about Oklahoma, where those trends are different, but that is an exception, not the rule. So 73% of women in Congress, for example, are Democrats. 66% of women state legislators are Democrats. 2/3 of women governors are Democrats. And so you see a pretty consistent trend there in a partisan break. We're also seeing increased racial and ethnic diversity among women. So when we talk about the status, we're seeing some growth in that diversity among women themselves when it comes to race and ethnicity. Right now, about 41% of women serving, for example, in the U.S. House are women of color. Greater progress again on the Democratic side, about close to 50% of the Democratic women in the House are women of color, if we categorize in that broad category. Our website does like a breakdown by group as well, because we want to make sure we don't just say women of color and look specifically at trends for women of different racial and ethnic groups. And so just to give you a couple of examples there, no Black women currently serve in the U.S. Senate. No Black woman has ever served as governor. So when we think about progress, it's also paired with the fact that we still have really glaring gaps in representation by groups. And we also have a lot of this is recent history. We're talking about a lot of firsts still, which shows we have a lot of work to do. For Latinas, just one Latina has ever served in the U.S. Senate, Catherine Cortez Masto, who's obviously vulnerable in this election in Nevada. 2 Latinas have served as governor, both in New Mexico. Texas didn't send its first Latinas to Congress until after the 2018 election, right? And that surprised some folks based on the demographics of the state. So again, we have to match those demographics of who's being represented by whom when we think about concepts of representation. And then, of course, the first Native American women, the first Middle Eastern, North African women were not elected to Congress until 2018 as well. And we just elected the first Alaska Native women. The last thing I want to say on this, when we talk about the numbers, is that in the statewide elected executive position, this is a place where we've seen the most significant underrepresentation specifically of women of color. And so if we look at the women who are currently serving in those offices, almost 80% are white, and historically that number is even greater, right? And so we've just seen an area of real lack of diversification of the women who serve in these positions. And I think we can all think about the implications of that, because these are very powerful and influential offices. So that's one area when we think about status that I think there's a lot of room for us to think about why and how we change those data. And then I would just say that obviously the status goes beyond those in elective office. And so what we try to look at when we think about women's political power are women in leadership positions, women as appointees, women as high-level staff, whether on campaigns or in government, women as lobbyists, women as activists. Many of the work that you all are doing in various spaces, right, is politically powerful. And so we are, again, seeing energy among women in increasing that political influence and power, but how do we then harness that and transfer into also those who are elected? And one way to do that is also to get women to give more politically and have a more financial voice in these conversations, because whether we like it or not, money matters in our elections. And so we know that women are significantly underrepresented as political donors. So that's another place where we could make some progress.